Okay, a 180 for Shay. And take note of the crowd. Evidently, in the next few weeks, there are a lot of people who are here now are not going to be here. So.
What did you say?
I said, take note of the crowd. I did a 180 for Shay. And I said, take note of the crowd because in the next few weeks, some of the people who are here today won't be here because they're traveling. So it will be even emptier unless there's a whole, you never know, could be a whole new rush of people come in looking for a church. And we're always welcome to have new people. All right, welcome to First Universalist Church in Madison. On this, it's like spring day to me. I mean, what happened to winter? It was like 70 degrees last winter. The daffodils are coming up. I've seen daffodils up when there's 2 feet of snow on top of them, you just brush them off. But that doesn't seem like that's going to happen, although with the weather the way it is, you never know. Do we have any announcements?
Are Chaz and Paula okay now?
I got an email from Paula. They both are better, but they're still not feeling well, so they're not going to be here today. And Mike came in and turned the heat on because Chaz didn't do that. But I know he's around because I put the trash can out because I had trash in it. And I was in a hurry, so I took it off the street and put it like 10 feet back in the driveway. And I was going to come back later Tuesday night and put it back behind the building. When I came back Tuesday night, Chaz had been here and put it back behind the building. He does not like the trash can sitting out in front of the building. So everything in its place and a place for everything. So, but I do appreciate being able to get rid of my trash in the church's trash can. So, in fact, I'm thinking about they won't pick up my recyclables, the orange, the green, the red bin that you put out in the country. They did for years. They picked it up, and then all of a sudden they just stopped picking it up. And I call the lady at Rumpke and say they missed my thing. We'll send somebody out to get it. Yeah, okay. It's still sitting there with soggy papers in it, like for 3 weeks. So I finally just quit putting it out. But I'm a true blue recycler, so I'm thinking about bringing my can up here and putting it out here. I mean, I know they pick them up in Madison. They do a real good job of that. And I actually got 3 of them. I can fill 3 of them up with all this scrap and paper and bottles and stuff we collect. All right, when's our meeting with El Dorado? When are they going to be here?
I believe April 9. I'm not looking at the calendar.
April 9. So we got March to go through. So Palm Sunday, we'll look back.
Yes, I'm just.
And then the last Sunday of March, we're going to do the Holocaust movie thing we're going to do here at church. So come to church. We'll have snacks. We'll have pizza, carry-in, whatever we have. And so you can come after church, do that, or you can come for church and stay over, or you can come for church and leave when that starts, or you can leave anytime in the middle. The Holocaust is a PBS presentation, 3 hours. And then they did a couple more, Treblinka, and a couple more that were really impressive. We're not going to do all of them, but since we're here, it'll give us time to do some of them. So we'll just kind of hit and miss, and if people want to discuss it, that's what we'll do. Okay. This is Black History Month. So this last Sunday in February, we're going to do on Black History. It started out to be all Black history, and I kind of got led into a side path. So we're not doing so much. We're going to do individualized Black history. We're going to talk about the Black codes, a little bit about Reconstruction, and about the history of Black history. So we'll see where that goes. Our welcome is 443 in the back of the hymnal. Which I should have had already pulled up. But, I was late today because I got a call from one of my tenants that they were in the emergency room. They had a bad tooth, and they actually went to the emergency room, got an IV antibiotic to get them started, and could I come and take them home? They called me at 8:30. So I said, well, you're going to have to be ready to go because I have to be at church, and I'm going to be late anyway if I come pick you up. So I drive clear to Greenville to Wayne Hospital, drive into the ER parking lot. They're not there. So I text them and say, if you're not out here in 2 minutes, you're going to have to walk home. And they didn't answer me back, so I came right straight back. So that's you try to be a good Samaritan, and sometimes it doesn't work out. All right, 443. we arrive out of many singular rooms. Walking over the branching, we come to be assured that brothers and sisters surround us to restore their images on our eyes. We enlarge our voices in common speaking and singing. We try again that solitude found in the midst of those who with us seek their hidden reckonings. Our eyes reclaim the remembered faces. Their voices stir the surrounding air. The warmth of her hands assures us and the gladness of our spoken names. This is the reason of cities, of homes, of assemblies in the houses of worship. It is good to be with one another. Kenneth L. Patton. All right, our prelude is Come Christians, Join to Sing. Very nice. Come Christians, join to sing, and all other persuasions or no persuasion. You're all welcome to sing.
Actually, that thing sounded like Carbon, Ohio, the Ohio State alma mater.
Really?
Yeah.
A little bit of
I was
borrowing.
going to do the Ohio.
Now we may have to, maybe somebody can play the Ohio anthem and we'll see once what the comparison is. Artists have been known to borrow from one another considerably. Our chalice lighting is the Light of Truth by Richard M. Fuchs. May the light of truth illumine our minds. May the spark of love set our hearts on fire. May the flame of freedom burn brightly within us, now and always. May the flame of freedom. I wonder if I copied that wrong or whether that was written wrong. I'll have to go look. Okay, our opening hymn is 111, Life of Ages. particularly appropriate, Life of Ages, verse 4, consecrating art and song, holy book and pilgrim way, quelling floods of triumph wrong, widening freedom's sacred sway. Particularly appropriate in what we're going through now. All right, affirmation is 462 in your hymnal. I shall take my voice wherever are those who want to hear the melody of freedom, or the words that might inspire hope and courage in the face of despair and fear. My weapons are peaceful, for it is only by peace that peace can be attained. The song of freedom must prevail. Paul Robeson, famous black author and poet from the 1800s, I think 1800s, yeah. Okay, our children's story, as you know, we're doing the Black History thing, and this is a panoply of black leaders, famous blacks in our history, and this one is, I've talked to you before about the Green Book, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, and I think we will. I probably should have done it this month if I'd thought about it earlier. There is a movie called The Green Book with Viggo Mortensen, the guy who was in Lord of the Rings. A really good movie, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but this is a description of it.
Did you go to the meetings in Madison?
Yes, no. I mean, there are record companies getting in Madison at 10 listing.
The Negro Motorist Green Book.
Yeah, it was all places colors that stayed on top. Like, traveling while black.
That's Viggo Mortensen and Linda Cardellini in the Golden Globe-winning movie Green Book. The movie's title is a reference to the real Green Book, a traveler's guide back in a hostile time, which some people still remember all too well. Our cover story is reported by Martha Teichman.
The fabulous Miss Mary Wilson.
Watching Mary Wilson feeling the love at New York's glamorous Cafe Carlyle. It's hard to imagine what she felt at the age of 19.
But my heart can't take you no more.
A newly minted Supreme, just out of high school, on her first ever road tour with a regular who's who of Motown stars. Stevie Wonder, Mary Wells, The Temptations, and others. 45 performers traveling by bus, confronted by hate in the still segregated South.
We did go to the bus, and there were gunshots.
And they were shooting at the bus.
Oh yeah, we had several holes in the bus. You know, your parents had told you, be careful, da 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 da. You knew about the segregation. But I mean, the gunshots sort of brought it right into your face and said, you could be killed.
It was this chilling fact of life, the racism that in 1936 inspired the Negro Motorist Green Book. Victor Green, a postal worker who lived in Harlem, began publishing a guide to businesses that welcomed African-American travelers.
You need to be careful on the road. Old Jim Crow won't let people like us stop just anywhere.
In each year's edition, a warning. Carry your Green Book with you. You may need it.
It just makes me wonder and make me think about today.
At the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., visitors can experience the not-so-long-gone era of the Green Book.
I remember as a little child going down south from Detroit, and my parents had to be strategic as to where they stopped.
It was after the Depression, before the war, the auto culture was really burgeoning. There were more jobs for Black people.
Candace Taylor is a cultural historian whose book about the Green Book will be published this fall.
By the 40s, the second wave of the Great Migration was underway. And so you had 1.5 million Black people leaving the South during that time.
At risk if they owned nice cars.
His dad worked for the railroad, had a good job, and his mother was sitting in the front seat.
Taylor tells the story of her own stepfather's family being stopped and relying on this tried and true subterfuge avoiding trouble.
So the sheriff comes to the door and says, you know, who's this car? Where are you going? Who are these people with you? And his father says, you know, this is my employer's car. He looked at his wife and he said, and she's the maid, and this is her son. And then the next question was, where's your hat? Meaning the chauffeur's hat. And he said, it's hanging right in the back, officer.
Essentials for driving in and out of the Jim Crow South, that chauffeur's hat, and the green book.
The green book was like a Bible. You did not leave home without it. I think this was taken in Louisville.
Alice Clay Broadwater relied on it. She was a teacher then, traveling with her lawyer husband and small children between Boston and the South.
Black travelers in those days, in the 50s, had to carry the green book if they needed to stay overnight someplace, or if they wanted to know where they could eat.
Unless, of course, there were no green book listings en route.
It was not only frightening, it was very unsafe. If you're stopping on the side of the road, you know, you can't really sleep.
So you pull off the road to take a nap,
Yes.
or to sleep,
Yes,
because there was no place else.
absolutely.
Route 66 was a huge hit for Nat King Cole. But here's the irony. For black travelers looking for places to stay along its more than 2,400 miles, good luck. Green book sites were scarce. So-called sundown towns were plentiful.
You see a sign on the way in,
What would it say?
N-word, don't let the sun set on you here. You could have a green book, but you could still find yourself in a sundown town at the wrong time. Sometimes you'd be escorted out of town by law enforcement. Sometimes you'd be harassed or chased, or worse.
Often a safe place to stay.
This was one of the rooms.
Was a room in someone's house. Since 2014, this historical marker has stood outside a Green Book listed tourist home in Columbia, South Carolina.
You've got all kinds of pictures here.
Run by Reggie Scott's mother and aunt.
That's new. This is new.
Yeah. 89 now, Scott grew up in the Harriet M. Cornwell tourist home and became a musician because of the players who stayed here.
Cal Calloway was my greatest assignment when he came out.
And
True.
He was here in this house.
Yes, Cal was here.
wow. If there's one common denominator they found doing this story, it is the musicians. The unbelievably famous names, who were also victims of segregation.
Duke Ellington and Billie Holiday stayed here. A lot of times they were performing downtown, where they were welcome to perform but not welcome to stay.
The Rossonian Hotel and Lounge in Denver,
That's amazing.
now undergoing renovation, was one of more than 80 businesses in the area listed in the Green Book.
These places carry a spirit with them. You know, which is why it's so important that they're still here. I was scouting about 30 sites a day.
Candace Taylor did 23,000 miles on her car during just one of her trips around the country, documenting more than 9,600 of the sites.
If I had to guess, I'd say about at least 85% were black-owned. But there were sites like Charlie's Sandwich Shop in Boston. It was in Southie. It was owned by a white man.
Charlie Poulos, a Greek immigrant, opened the restaurant in 1927, and with his partner, Christy Mangiarides, served all races, possibly the first restaurant in Boston to do so.
Was there a backlash?
It was, yeah. There was some pushback.
Damien Marcianti bought Charlie's in 2017.
The original owners did not care. They just were welcome to everybody. If you didn't like it, you didn't come in.
It didn't hurt that the Black Pullman Porters Union had its headquarters upstairs. The railroad workers spread the word about Charlie's even before it began listing in the Green Book in 1947. And of course, the jazz greats read their Green Books and came to Charlie's.
Duke Ellington, Cap Calloway, Sammy Davis Jr., he used to tap dance out in front of the diner.
As times changed, so did the Green Book, for sale by subscription and at Esso gas stations in its heyday. It sold 2 million copies a year. But in the 1948 edition, Victor Green wrote, "There will be a day sometime in the near future when this guide will not have to be published. This is when we as a race will have equal opportunities and privileges in the United States."
And then that day comes, and he never lives to see it because he dies in 1960.
In 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed, mandating the end of segregation. Publication of the Green Book ceased in 1967. It was largely forgotten, its true legacy underestimated.
Walk with me.
So important that we look at the Green Book not just as a historic travel guide, not as just something that we needed in the past.
Walk with me.
But what the Green Book teaches us is about the resilience and the courage of what Black people were able to do and accomplish in spite of the circumstances and everything that happened.
What do you think? It's kind of tough to watch, isn't it, when you see it all put in a package, one thing after another. And this was not that long ago. I mean, most of us were around in the 60s and the 50s. Yes?
And when was this film made?
The film was made in 2015 or 16, 17. So,
You mean the episode that we just watched from Sunday morning?
no, that was like 3 or 4 years ago. I don't really have the date on it. It probably says the date. But the film was made, it would have had to been later than that. It would have had to been after 2017 when the film was made. Because they had Viggo, remember at the beginning, Viggo Mortensen? So they had an excerpt. It probably was made at this contemporaneously with the film. That's probably what inspired them to talk about the Green Book, was the movie The Green Book. I think you will like the movie The Green Book. It's a very satisfying movie, but it's also a very emotionally moving movie. I can talk a little bit about it now. Viggo Mortensen played, let's see, got his name. If I can find it. Well, I'll come to it as we go along. He played a Brooklyn Italian-American. Basically, he was a bouncer or an enforcer for the mob, and he was hired to drive a guy named Don Shirley. These are real people too. I mean, this movie is made on the real life experiences of two real people. The Viggo Mortensen character, whose name I can't remember now, but I've got it written down, was real. And Don Shirley, the black entertainer, was a real person. These two remained friends even after this little episode ended. But Don Shirley was hired as a classical pianist to give recitals all across the South, in country clubs and theaters and places like that. And Viggo Mortensen, his character, was hired as a driver to drive him to all these places because, number one, Don Shirley was Harvard-educated, very well-educated classical pianist, but he didn't have a driver's license and didn't know how to drive a car. He was one of those very intellectual people. And you'll see in the movie, his apartment is decorated with all kinds of expensive ivory and things. He made a lot of money in his career. So he drove him around, and some of the experiences they had going through the South, many times they would go to like a country club where he would be expected to play, but he wasn't allowed to eat there. They told him he could eat in the kitchen or he could eat and they put him in a closet to change his clothes, and then told him he could eat in the closet. And there was some different confrontations going on there. So it's a very interesting movie and a very interesting development. The one thing, and I think I told you this before, that I really remember, a salient point of that movie was when they were driving down the road, and the Brooklyn mobster, told Don Shirley, the black pianist, that he, the Brooklyn guy, was more black than the black guy was. And he became outraged. He said, how's that possible? And he said, I live on the streets. I live with the kind of things that black people live with. You live in a Manhattan high-rise apartment surrounded by, you have your own servants, you have your food brought in, you have everything given to you. You don't know what life is like for the real black people that live down in the streets. That was a really interesting observation and a really interesting point. And it did make, it kind of was an opening wedge to develop their relationship between just the hired driver who was there just to do his job and a guy who didn't have any friends and was very lonely. So we'll go ahead and talk about that. But anyway, it's the book. This is and the places they stop were places that were listed in the Green Book. And there is an episode where they're in the town that's no blacks after dark, and then they would stop many times or multiple times. Why is a white guy driving around a black guy? Shouldn't it be the other way around? Just all kinds of little interesting things went on in this movie. Okay, joys and concerns. I think segregation in America, which is still going on, and I'm not so sure there hasn't been a research kind of episode with what's going on with that, with the latest permission we've been given by certain of our leaders that we can act out on our worst impulses. I think some of that's coming back, some things we never would have heard in the street before we're hearing now. All right, any other joy? Chaz and Paula, we got an email from them, an email. They're both were positive, and they both are feeling better, but they still aren't out of it yet. I can make a little comment. How many know who Jim Inhofe was or is? Jim Inhofe is a senator from Oklahoma, very conservative, voted against every COVID bill, every COVID support bill, every vaccine bill, everything else, did not believe anything about it. Guess what happened to Jim Inhofe? He didn't die, but he got COVID. He's in his early 80s. He was forced to retire from the Senate because he has what they call long COVID. He got COVID like 3 years ago, and he still hasn't gotten rid of it yet. And he's not able. He's so debilitated he can't even hardly get around. So he's retiring from the Senate, and said in public, the reason I'm retiring is because of long COVID. I can't function the way I used to function. And he said there's multiple other people in the Senate who have long COVID, but nobody will admit it except me. So sometimes justice is served, I guess purely by accident.
And let's not forget the residents of East Palestine, Ohio, still in the news, living with that fear of, can we return home and breathe the air, and are we going to suffer life consequences as a result of that? It's truly tragic if you think of how that's so invasive to one's personal life so directly. We take for granted a reasonably healthy community each day where we live. The other unfortunate part of that is that there had to be one more event that was politicized.
Yes.
And it's not who did what, when, and pointing fingers. It's more importantly, where's the sympathy? Where's the empathy for those people dealing with, do I leave my home and move elsewhere if I have the means? Or do I simply live, tolerate it, and live with this paranoia of a potentially life-threatening disorder that may terminate my life earlier? If you really think about it personally, the politics is so trivial, but I'll stop there. Let's light a candle for those individuals.
And I don't think the politics is trivial. I think the politics has taken the main situation. The first thing is, do you trust science? I mean, I saw Mike DeWine drinking the water. The EPA says the water is safe, and they say the air is safe. So I'm going to have to take them at their word. That doesn't mean that the ground is not contaminated, so you don't want your kids rolling around in the dirt because you know that smoke is settled onto the ground.
Or the potential for simply 48 hours of exposure 20 years later.
Right.
Those are the uncertainties that I really feel we should concentrate on, at least our thoughts and prayers, if you will, that's what's needed. It's not the political pointing fingers of who got there first, and who really cares and who doesn't. It's what about the people, and how can they be supported? And the science can say today, you're just fine, rest and relax. Whereas the science in the future
you live in Dark County and drink the well water from Dark County, you want to be aware of that too. Paraquat has been used here, Roundup's been used here, and both of those are shown to give cancer, to cause cancer in the future. So it's not just the people in Palestine, it's everybody that's exposed to this. A lot of the little microchemicals are showing up in fish and in animal blood, the animals that we consume as food. So this stuff is spreading across the world. But I want to go back to the politics for just a second, because the reason that accident occurred was, if you saw the news, a bearing overheated. And earlier, the Obama administration passed rules that the railroads had to install these warning devices, and they had to install special brakes on any train that was carrying hazardous chemicals that would stop the train in a short amount of time. The next administration canceled all those rules. So the rules that might have stopped that wreck from happening were in place, and then they were canceled at the behest of the railroad companies because it cost them too much money. The engineers, the people on the train knew, because the warning things did go off, it told them that bearing was overheating, but they couldn't get the train stopped in time before the bearing blew out, and the truck, which is the wheels under the car, came loose, and once one car goes off the rails, then all the rest of them behind go off the rails too. The second thing is, the Congressional Committee on National something has started an investigation of what? Does anybody know what they're investigating? They're investigating Pete Buttigieg because he didn't go visit the site for 7 days after the wreck. That's what they're investigating, not because the rules were changed, not because of the railroad company ignoring safety devices. They're investigating why the Director of Transportation, Secretary of Transportation, waited 7 days. You want to know the other interesting little fact? You know how many train derailments there were during the Trump administration? I think there was like 1,000. You know how many Elaine Chao, their Secretary of Transportation, went to? None. She went to none out of 1,000, but they're investigating Pete Buttigieg because it took him 7 days to get there. That's the situation we're in today, where things are like grade school, or even, I'm not even sure grade school, maybe kindergarten is where we are here. This is just, so. Okay, Ukraine, it's been a year in Ukraine. Nothing has changed. The whole Russian approach is to basically destroy the country, so there's nothing left. They destroy the agricultural. I told you about the dam that they're trying to eliminate, the water they're trying to eliminate from irrigation. They're trying to eliminate all the electricity supply. They're bombing schools. There was a little thing, there was over 1,000 medical clinics and hospitals throughout Ukraine that have been bombed, targeted, bombed. These are like war crimes. Any other situation, any other century, these would be reported as war crimes, and nothing is being done. There's nothing that can be done, basically. Turkey, they've had 2 more earthquakes, not as large as the first one, but some of them have struck in towns near or beyond where the first earthquake was. They were overmatched on their supplies and rescue efforts before, and it just continues to get worse. The last official toll I heard was like 47,000 dead, but I'm hearing projections now of over 100,000 people, because there are villages in Turkey and Syria that nobody has even gotten to yet that have been completely flattened. So, and there's nobody, whoever's left in those towns are trying to just dig them out with by hand, and anybody who's been trapped for 2 weeks is no longer alive. So the death toll is going to be astronomical here. It's I don't know what to say. Tragedy goes on, and it's how we respond to tragedy what makes the difference. All right, and the last thing that I'll bring up, who knows what the latest move is to make a national item that the congressional conservatives are bringing up? A new national thing that we haven't had before. We have national flowers, national birds, national animals. We have almost something of everything for national reptiles. What's the one thing we haven't had yet, but we are going to get courtesy of these people? A national gun. Do we know what it is?
No.
Sure we do.
AR-15.
The AR-15, they're putting a bill up to make the AR-15 a national gun. You know how many mass killings there have been as of last week? 67 mass shootings. That means more than 3 people shot or killed. You have to have more than 3 people shot or killed to be a mass shooting. 67 in the 3rd week of February, so more than there are days. They happen so often you can't even keep track of them now, and most of them don't even make the news anymore. That's the situation we're in, and we're investigating why Pete Buttigieg waited 7 days to come to Ohio. Okay, we could go on and on. The list is endless. Anyone have anything else? All right. One candle for the frustration that I feel, and even though I talk about it, I still can't resolve it. I can't find an answer for it. I'm trying to understand it, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right. Our message is Black History Month. You can see here, this is actually a copy of the Negro Motorist Green Book. And this is Black Codes in Georgia. It's one of the posters that I found. So what we're going to talk about is, and actually let me start with something else that's apropos to what we're talking about. Stupidity. They're actually doing some studies on stupidity, and there is a new theory of stupidity. Stupidity is not a lack of intelligence or knowledge, but it is a lack of awareness of the limits of one's intelligence or knowledge. It is more important right now than ever before, and I'll tell you why. The same study mentioned above showed that when cues were given to make participants engage in partisan thought, the Dunning-Kruger effect, and that's the new scientific name for stupidity, is the Dunning-Kruger effect, became more pronounced. In other words, if someone is reminded of the Republican-Democrat divide, they become even more overconfident in their uninformed positions. This finding suggests that in today's unprecedentedly divided political climate, we are all more likely to have an inflated sense of confidence in our unsupported beliefs and ideals. So they're beginning to study it, and they're finding out that stupidity is rampant, as we've all been aware, but we haven't scientifically studied it yet. And it's not limited to one side or the other. Anybody can become entrenched in their beliefs and in their understanding of what's going on. So that is the goal, that is the clue, that is what we preach here, and that is what we teach here, is to use your mind and look for the facts. Review the information that you have, review the understanding that you have constantly, and check to see, is it real? Does it match the facts that you see? Does it match your observations? Try to not be stupid, please. Okay, let me give you a quote by Malcolm X. If this is kind of what we're talking about with Black history. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, that's not progress. If you pull it out all the way, that's not progress. Progress is healing the wound that the blow made in the first place. That's Malcolm X, who was castigated and basically assassinated, and there's questions as to who actually assassinated him, whether it was his own people who were rivals, or whether the FBI or the CIA had a hand in it, and no one knows for sure. But he was an intelligent person who was tired of what was going on and approached things a little more militantly than I would have supported, but I understand where they were coming from. All right, let me start with an example to tell you where we are. This is 1968. There was a black gentleman in Georgia, or in Virginia. His name was Bruce Tucker. He was a laborer, and he fell from like a 3-story building and was paralyzed and basically mortally injured, but he was still alive in the hospital. Without his knowledge, without his family's knowledge, without anybody's permission, they declared him brain dead, took his heart, and transplanted it into a white business executive who needed a transplanted heart. This is the first transplant that took place in Virginia. It was successful, and the white business executive went on to live a full and productive life. The question is, Bruce he was not an organ donor. He didn't sign a card. They didn't have cards in 1968. His family didn't even know. They just found out that he died, and they didn't even find out till later that they had taken his heart and given it to someone else. This is 1968. This is when we were supposed to be approaching reality, equality, no such thing as racism anymore. Okay, if race has no history, it has no worthwhile tradition. It becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated. That's a quote from Carter G. Woodson. He was the historian, a black historian, who created black history in 1926. He's the person who gave it a name, who said we need to actually collect and collate and print black history so black people are aware of what's happening in their world. He originally started out Black History Week, and then it kind of expanded into Black History Month, and that wasn't until, does anybody know when Black History Month became official? Gerald Ford was the president, was in the 70s. I think it was 76, I'm not really sure. But that was not that long ago either that Black History Month was finally recognized. But they encourage people to learn about and celebrate the long-neglected accomplishments and contributions of Black Americans. And that's what I started out to do. But Black History Month, if you look at the information, it's inventors, musicians, actors, people who have contributed to society who are Black, people like George Washington Carver that invented peanut butter. Some of the things that we do, that we all use on a normal basis, we don't realize were invented by Black people. As I went along, I kind of veered off into studying what caused the whole situation to arise in the first place. That's where we get into Black codes, and that's where we get into how Blacks were treated. Anybody know who that is? Al Jolson was famous for blackface and singing the song Mammy. Everybody understands intuitively in your gut what the whole point of blackface was, what the whole point of minstrel shows were. Let's go through that a little bit. Woodson originally chose February for the month of Black History because Frederick Douglass, who had escaped slavery and became a key abolitionist and social reformer, that was his birthday was in February. That was attributed because Frederick Douglass did not know when he was born because he was Black and born into a slave family, and nobody kept records of slave families. They barely kept their names. But also, it was the birthday month of Abraham Lincoln, who issued the Emancipation Proclamation. So they figured February was an appropriate month. And I'm sure white America said, yes, February is the perfect month because February is the shortest month. So if you're going to have a Black Appreciation Month, why not pick the shortest one? Okay. In 1948, this is when the Green Book was first published by Victor Hugo Green. That's another interesting observation of Black families. Where did Black families get their names? They were given to them by their white owners, the white plantation owners. Some white plantation owners were well-read and well-educated. So they gave them like famous historical figures. That's why there's lots of Washingtons and Lincolns and not many Smiths and Jones. There are some, but not as many. But there's also some like Victor Hugo Green. So he was the author of the Green Book. He was a postman, and his original listings were organized by state and city, with the vast majority located in major metropolitan areas such as Chicago and Detroit. More remote places had fewer options. How many, what do you want to guess the number of listings in Alaska were for the Green Book? One. One listing for the Green Book in the entire state of Alaska. And that was in 1960, when it was close to the end of it. But even in cities with no black-friendly hotels, the book often listed the addresses of homeowners who were willing to rent rooms. In 1954, it suggested that visitors to tiny Roswell, New Mexico, should stay at the home of Mrs. Mary Collins. So they traveled from home to home. It listed gas stations where they could get gas. It listed restaurants where they were allowed to eat. And as you heard here, if you were in the middle of someplace and didn't have a hotel, whatever, you just pulled off the side of the road, and then you were liable to have the police stop and say, "What are you doing parked on the side of the road?" So. All right, something else we ran into at the same time as the Black Codes was Jim Crow. Several characters in minstrel shows became archetypes as described in the University of Florida's digital exhibit, The History of Minstrels, from Jumpin' Jim Crow to the jazz singer. Some of the most famous ones were Rice's Jim Crow, a rural dancing fool in tattered clothing, Mammy, an overweight, loud mother figure. Everybody has seen Mammy. And Zip Coon, a flamboyantly dressed man who used sophisticated words incorrectly. How many people have seen that? Most of the minstrel show actors were working-class Irishmen from the Northeast who performed in blackface. Why? To distance themselves from their own lower social, political, and economic status in the United States. They did it to authenticate their whiteness. It was the same as saying, we can become the other and mock the other and assert our superiority by dehumanizing the other. So the Irish, as you all know, were oppressed when they first emigrated to the United States. They were pushed into ghettos. They were made fun of. There were signs about nobody hired the Irish, about how stupid they were, how they looked funny. But the one way for the Irish to get a step up was to step on top of someone else, which turned out to be the blacks. That is one of the mysteries to me of human behavior. People who have been oppressed, you would think, and I'm thinking of Israel right now, would be the ones who step up and save other people from oppression. Instead, they take the lessons they learned and apply them to someone one step down below who they are. I do not understand that. All right, blackface minstrel shows soared in popularity, in particular during the period after the Civil War and the start of the 20th century, as documented in the National Museum of African American History and Culture at the Smithsonian. The widespread demeaning portrayal of African Americans paralleled a period where the Southern state legislature were passing black codes to restrict the behavior of former slaves and other African Americans. In fact, the codes were also called Jim Crow laws after the blackface stage character. As society modernized, so did the ways in which blackface was portrayed. Not only was blackface in theaters, but it moved into the film industry. How many have seen the blockbuster movie, The Birth of a Nation? That is, we maybe have to show that here, although I'm not sure I can stomach it. We may have to show some outtakes of it. That was one of the first nationally released movies in theaters all over the country. It used all kinds of new techniques, scene shots, setup shots. It was a silent movie, but it was a production masterpiece of its day. The only problem was it was completely and totally from the ground up racist. The Birth of a Nation blackface characters were soon seen as unscrupulous and rapist. The stereotypes were so powerful they became a recruiting tool for the Ku Klux Klan. African Americans protested the film's portrayals and its distorted take on the Civil War era, yet it continued to be popular among white audiences. Curiously, African Americans also performed in blackface, given it was the only way to be in the entertainment industry. But their performances countered some of the primitive representations that were popularized. Black artists Burt Williams and George Walker infused political commentary with their comedic minstrel routines, offering a more intelligent representation of African Americans. So you had blacks who could not get a job in the theater or the movie industry, actually put cork or paste on their face to make themselves blacker than they were if they were light-skinned, and then performed as a minstrel. But they subtly gave representations that were not completely stupid, not completely idiotic, and sometimes played fun on the white people that were around them, only surreptitiously, so the white people didn't really realize it at the time. Blackface minstrelsy remained a genre heavily dominated by white actors. Al Jolson, a Lithuanian Jewish immigrant who came to New York as a child, became one of the most influential blackface stars of the 20th century, including his 1927 hit film, The Jazz Singer. The appeal of blackface declined after the 30s and into the civil rights movement. However, the negative stereotypes of African Americans mocking dark skin have persisted in recent decades. For example, blackface appeared in the Oscar ceremony in 2012 on television skits, and wearing blackface to dress up as famous African Americans during Halloween remains an issue. Does anybody know, can you think of any of those that have happened? Remember the Virginia Governor Ralph Northam and the State Attorney General Mark Herring both admitted in 2019 to wearing blackface costumes as college students. Of course, this is in the South. So college students are not known for being rational, not known for being responsible. But I'm sure they knew at the time what they were doing was disrespectful. But they were doing it for a crowd of people who had the same thoughts and the same beliefs. History is usually written by the winners, but that wasn't the case when Birth of a Nation was released on February 8, 1915. In just over 3 hours, D.W. Griffith's controversial epic film about the Civil War and Reconstruction depicted the Ku Klux Klan as valiant savers of a post-war South ravaged by Northern carpetbaggers and immoral freed black people. The film was an instant blockbuster, and with innovative cinematography and a Confederate skewed point of view, The Birth of a Nation helped rekindle the KKK. Until the movie's debut, the KKK, founded in 1865 by Confederate veterans in Pulaski, Tennessee, was a regional organization in the South, and that was all but obliterated due to government suppression. But The Birth of a Nation's racially charged Jim Crow narrative, coupled with Americans' heightened anti-immigrant climate, led the Klan to align itself with the movie's success and use it as a recruiting tool. So the same thing happened in the 20s. None of us can remember that, but I've got the history of DeKalb County, which is where I grew up in Indiana, and there was an active Klan cell in Avila, Indiana, which is in DeKalb County, with multiple members, including lawyers, doctors, prominent people in the town were members of the Klan. So it was not, I'm not sure exactly how it was recognized. I'm sure it was recognized as using the stereotypes, but it was also recognized as a patriotic, pro-American, anti-immigrant, kind of like what we saw in the last 10 years, the pro-American, anti-immigrant, and which we are seeing right now with people who seem to support Russia more than they support Ukraine, saying we should not spend money, we should not give money to Ukraine, and the Russians, you know, it's their country, they had it before, they should get it back. All right, adapted from the book The Klansman by Thomas Dixon Jr., who was a classmate and friend of President Woodrow Wilson. The Birth of a Nation portrayed Reconstruction as catastrophic. It showed radical Republicans encouraging equality for black people, who in the film are represented as uncouth, intellectually inferior, and predators of white women. And this racist narrative was widely accepted as historical fact. Yes?
There was a very active Klan in Vandalia, and it was like the movers and shakers of the town all along.
Yep.
And it had nothing to do with blacks. It was immigrants
Yes.
that they were against. But it was, I mean, it was the social thing to do.
And there probably weren't any blacks in town at the time. So, and the sad thing is with these stereotypes, sometimes the stereotypes are taken up by the actual target race. In other words, sometimes blacks, we heard about the black men taking advantage of white women. There are black men who take advantage of white women and think of themselves as superior lovers, and there are white women who buy into that and are attracted to black men. There's nothing wrong with black men and white women, white or black women and white men, but the mindset that they have, what they're drawn into, is a fantasy world that has been created by literature and by movies and by something else. People are sensitive to that, and people are attracted to that kind of thing, and we all know that that exists. The same thing with black culture. Black culture in the inner city is a different culture than we have. They really like to dress. If you've watched Mardi Gras or anything like that, looking good is very important. Driving good cars is very important. Every culture has its own thing that's important and not important. And we have to learn to accept and understand and deal with another culture, just if it was German, French, Swedish. Every culture has its own mores, its own ways of operating, its own things they think important. But when the two are cheek to jowl, side by side, it's pretty incredible. If you're driving down Salem Avenue or somewhere, you feel like you're in a strange country, and that's not unusual. That's something that's normal to feel if it's a different culture than your own. The thing is, you don't put that culture down, you don't castigate that culture, you don't demean that culture just because it's different. Okay, people were primed for the message, says Paul McEwen, film studies professor at Muhlenberg College, author of The Birth of the Nation film classics. Hard to argue that this was a distortion of history when the history books at the time said the same thing. And then we get to the black codes. In the late 1865, Mississippi and South Carolina enacted the first black codes. Mississippi's law required black people to have written evidence of employment for the coming year each January. If they left before the end of the contract, they would be forced to forfeit earlier wages and were subject to arrest. They had to sign a contract with their employer in January, and they had to stay for the entire year. If they left, they forfeited their wages, and they could be sentenced to basically slavery for running out on a contract. So the same thing is happening now with housing contracts, with voting rules. Talk about the restrictions on voting that are sweeping the South and actually creeping up into Ohio and Indiana and even Michigan. If people are in line to vote because there weren't enough polling places set up in the inner city, so there was only one and everybody has to stay in line. If somebody tries to give them water or food, that's illegal. You have to have a photo ID to vote. The only place you can get the photo ID is the one driver's license place, which used to be in the inner city, in downtown in the courthouse. Now they've all been moved to the suburbs. So if you don't have transportation, you have to, and they say the ID is free, but getting to that ID, particularly if you have a job, getting there during working hours, and I'm sure many of you have been to the BMV, the line there is usually astronomical. And that's in the days now when you can do everything online. You have to go there and get your picture taken. So they've made it as hard as possible to get your voting ID. In South Carolina, a law prohibited black people from holding any occupation other than two choices: farmer, or for the men and for the women, household servant. And they paid an annual tax of $10 to $100 to have any other occupation. If you wanted to be a tailor or a restaurant owner or a driver, a taxi driver, you had to pay a license as a black person to have some other occupation other than farmer or servant. This provision hit free black people already living in Charleston and former slave artisans especially hard in both states. Black people were given heavy penalties for vagrancy, including, you heard the chain gangs, those were real things, forced plantation labor in some cases. If somebody was found walking through town and didn't have his papers, he could be sent for 30 days to work on the cotton fields because the cotton plantation owner needed help. Under Johnson's Reconstruction policies, nearly all the southern states would enact their own black codes in 1865 and 1866. While the codes granted certain freedoms to African Americans, including the right to buy and own property, marry, make contracts, testify in court, with what limitation? They could only testify in court in cases involving black people. They could not testify against white people. The primary purpose was to restrict black persons' labor and activity. Ooh, man, I've been blabbing on too long here. Sometimes the states limited the property black people could own, while virtually all the Confederate states passed strict vagrancy and labor contract laws and so-called anti-enticement measures designed to punish anyone who offered higher wages to a black laborer already under contract. If you had a black person working for you and someone else offered him more money to work for them, the black person could be arrested. Black people who broke labor contracts were subject to arrest, beating, and forced labor, and apprenticeship laws forced many minors, either orphans or whose parents were deemed unable to support them by the judge, into unpaid labor for white planters. We have to quit. I've gone on way too long. Transgressions are, you can't count, they're innumerable. And it's not that far away, and it's coming upon us again, I'm afraid. So the same mentality is trying to do the same thing to the same people. Okay, any questions, comments? We'll do the Green Book. It'll give you actual emotional connection to what happened in those days. There's some pretty moving scenes there. The offering. Please contribute what you can. Take if you need. Remember, we are supporting fish in Greenville, and we also have sent money to Ukraine, and that is always another possibility as the need continues to increase. And we're going to hear Wade in the Water. And one slide we get to, does anybody know who this is? Shirley Temple in one of her movies in blackface. I thought that was pretty remarkable. Okay. Our closing hymn is 149, Lift Every Voice and Sing. How many of you heard that at the Super Bowl? That was what was sung at the Super Bowl, and what people don't sometimes realize, this is actually the national anthem of the NAACP, or it was chosen as the Black History National Anthem. So we want to follow along on the words. If you can't sing, just follow along with the words. Pretty amazing lyrics when you know the history of what this song is about. We don't have time to read it today, but we'll read it again and we'll do it again. All right. Singing in the Chalice is 732. And this is a Martin Luther King Sunday, which we didn't do on Martin Luther King Sunday. For Martin Luther King Jr., great spirit of light and darkness, we gather once again to remember a fallen friend and to nourish ourselves from the fountain of reflections. Open our hearts to the anguish of our pain, to the tired taste of swallowed tears, and to our unrealized vision. In this place, we bring scattered lives together, groping for meaning and looking for truth. Be with us as we continue our search for understanding of the mysteries of the temporal. Stay with us as we wander through our memories, seeking pathways to the future. Move with us as we unravel the implied imperatives of hope unfulfilled. Justice makes the tireless demands, and we grow weary. As we touch one another in common cause and with the Great Spirit in our midst, let us find the way and the courage to realize the dream which still lives within us. Amen. And that's by Tony Vincent. All right. That ends our service. It's the last day in February, and let me show you a little happier note. As I told you, Between the Ears is a list, or a compilation of photographs people have taken around the world from the back of their horse. This is my two favorite things, a horse and Yosemite from the back of a horse. Wouldn't that be amazing to be able to ride your horse through Yosemite National Park? All right, there are donuts. This is the last day for those, and we'll have our postlude is don't get, what is it?
Around much.
Oh, don't get around much anymore. Duke Ellington. All right. Duke Ellington, what a temper. All right. No, I don't know where that was came from.
Where would they put it at?
Did you, Roberta, did you find this out? Oh, okay. I didn't see it, so I'll put it in next time. Yes.